Have you ever noticed how being alone feels natural to you, but explaining that to others feels strangely exhausting? You're not hiding. You're not isolating yourself out of fear. You're just more at ease when the world quiets down. And yet, somewhere along the way, being comfortable alone starts to feel like something you have to justify. Because the world is loud about one thing, connection is supposed to look a certain way. You're supposed to want constant company. You're supposed to feel lonely when you're by yourself. You're supposed to recharge around people. But for you, it doesn't quite work like that. You don't feel empty when you're alone. You feel clearer. Your thoughts settle. Your body softens. And that contradiction is where the psychology gets interesting. People who prefer being alone aren't driven by avoidance. They're often driven by regulation. Your nervous system isn't wired to seek stimulation for safety. It seeks predictability, consistency, space to process. When you're around others, especially in groups, your mind doesn't go blank, it goes busy. You're tracking tone, reading subtle shifts, adjusting your energy, staying slightly alert. Not because you're anxious, but because you learned early that being attuned kept things smoother. So solitude becomes the one place where you don't have to manage anything. You don't have to perform warmth. You don't have to respond quickly. You don't have to decide how much of yourself to show. You just exist. And that's not withdrawal, that's relief. Many people who enjoy being alone grew up learning that quiet meant safety. Not necessarily silence, but emotional quiet. Less tension, fewer expectations. No sudden shifts to respond to. So your system learns something important. Calm happens when nothing is demanded from you. That learning stays in the body longer than it stays in memory. Which is why even positive social moments can feel draining. Not because they're bad, but because they require energy that solitude doesn't. You may notice that after time with people, even people you love, you need time alone not to escape them, but to return to yourself. To feel your own pace again, your own rhythm, your own thoughts without interruption. That's not antisocial, that's self-regulation. But here's where it becomes complicated. Because preferring solitude in a social world can slowly turn into self-doubt. You start wondering, why don't I miss people the way others do? Why do I feel more present alone than in conversations? Why does connection sometimes feel like effort? And without realizing it, you start translating preference into something darker. You call it a flaw, a problem, a sign that something is wrong with you. But the psychology doesn't point to deficiency, it points to sensitivity. People who prefer being alone often process deeply. They don't skim experience, they absorb it. Which means stimulation lingers longer, emotions echo more deeply. Interactions take time to settle. So solitude isn't emptiness, it's integration. It's how your mind makes sense of what is taken in. And when you don't get enough of it, you don't become lonely, you become scattered, restless, irritable, disconnected from yourself. That's your system asking for space, not people. Still, the pressure creeps in. You notice how easily others fill their calendars, how casually they move from one interaction to the next. And you start asking yourself if you're missing something essential. But here's the thing, connection isn't measured by quantity. Some people connect through presence, others through proximity, and some through depth. If you prefer being alone, you likely connect in layers, not crowds. You bond slowly, selectively, when there's meaning. And when that meaning isn't there, your system doesn't fake it. It retreats, not to punish others, but to preserve itself. This is especially true if, at some point, you learn that being emotionally open required caution. Not because people were cruel, but because being misunderstood hurt more than being alone. So solitude became honest, predictable, kind. And over time, your inner world became rich enough that it didn't need constant external input. That doesn't make you closed off. It makes you internally resourced. But it also means you might struggle when others interpret your need for space as distance. They might ask why you don't reach out more, why you disappear to recharge, why you don't seem to need people. And you might start shrinking your needs to keep peace. Saying you're just tired, busy, overwhelmed, instead of saying the truer thing. I function better when I have room to be myself. There's nothing wrong with preferring your own company. The only real struggle comes when you start believing you need to be different to be acceptable. When you override your natural rhythm to match someone else's, that's when solitude stops being nourishing and starts being defensive. Not because being alone is the problem, but because you're no longer choosing it freely. Healthy solitude is chosen. Protective solitude is automatic. And the difference matters. If you notice that you avoid people not because you enjoy being alone, but because being seen feels unsafe, that's something to listen to gently. Not judge, not force, just notice. Because the goal isn't to become more social. The goal is to feel safe enough to choose. Some days that choice will be connection. Other days it will be quiet. Both are valid. Both are human. Preferring being alone doesn't mean you don't value relationships. It means you value alignment. You want connection that doesn't cost you yourself. And that's not too much to ask. It's simply knowing how you work. You don't need to explain it to everyone. You don't need to justify it with productivity or exhaustion. You're allowed to enjoy your own company without turning it into a problem to solve. You're not missing out, you're listening. And that kind of awareness is its own form of wisdom.